And good evening. Today is still Thursday, June 17th, 2001. I am your host, Evan George, and welcome to Bostopia Nightly News. In tonight's show tonight, we are going to do a little bit of a further deep dive into the recent poll of the Boston mayoral race. A new article from WBUR shows just how much the Seaport was a disastrous decision for the city. Also, we have the most recent Boston City Council general meeting on Wednesday, where some new committees were established. And we have the Committee on Ways and Means, which is going to talk about what Boston plans to do with the hundreds of millions of dollars it's about to receive, excuse me, from the American Rescue Plan from the federal government. And with that, for my TikTok friends, I'd recommend switching over to Twitch, ideally Twitch or YouTube, so you can see all the visuals. But for everyone else, let's go right into that first story. So this polling data, as soon as there we go, learn how to grab it. This polling data is roughly 1 month old that I reported on in both the podcast and on the TikTok. So everyone keep that in mind. However, it is a whole different group of people. It was done by this new developer real estate construction union team that I talked about in the last few episodes. And their kickoff, even though they have yet to endorse anyone, was to release this poll, which I found fascinating. And to repeat the numbers, it had Kim Janey at 22% leading the pack, followed in a statistical tie with Michelle Wu at 21%, and then a massive drop for Anissa Sabi-George, who's currently sitting at 10%, Andrea Campbell at 6%, and the two Johns at 5%. And what I drew from this is two things. One, we don't know to what extent this data was collected versus the other poll that had Anissa Sabi-George as the actual front runner, Kim 2, Michelle 3, I believe. And so it wouldn't shock me if these numbers are just a little bit old and it doesn't take into account for that, we'll call it Anissa bump. However, judging by the fact that both of those polls had such a high level, and I'm now welcoming the podcast audience, just the fact that the two most recent polls in the Boston mayoral race both had 30 to 35% completely undecided. And so it wouldn't shock me, again, if just the 400 people polled in the one survey versus the 500 people in the other was so different because so few people are paying attention to this. And even those that are, there are still quite a few undecideds. But still, it is worth commenting on Anissa's massive drop in this poll, and whether or not that shows the first poll that had her way ahead, and by way ahead, leading in the top tier. Right now, there's certainly two different tiers emerging. And in this poll, they actually have her closer to that tier 2 range. However, there have been absolutely two constants. One has been Michelle Wu, and the second has been the Kim Janey storyline. Answering a quick question that I see, I think, from my friend in the chat. This most recent poll, actually, their data was taken before the one that had Anissa at 22. So let me give an update on that. This polling data for the most recent poll that has been published, I believe took theirs right in the middle of May. This is not getting me some good concrete dates that I can draw upon. Oh, I'm sorry, May 13th to May 16th. So the one I'm reporting on right now that had Kim Janey at 22, Michelle at 21, and Anissa at 10, 655 for the Tier 2 candidates. Their data was collected May 13th to May 16th. On the other previously published poll, their data was taken roughly 1 to 2 weeks after that, May 25th to May 30th, and then they had Anissa at 22, Wu 18, Kim 16. Again, I would be shocked if within that 1 to 2 week time period, Anissa did something incredible which accounted for a 12-point bump in the polls, right? So I think that And the difference between the two really just goes to show you how wide open this race is, how few people are paying attention, and how even the ones that are paying attention have not fully decided what they're doing yet. That's what I take from that, from the Anissa storyline from this. But for the second, as I said before, Kim Janey has consistently been polling very well in that tier 1, and so has Michelle Wu. And so, as this race is now, I would be shocked if one of them does not make it out of the prelims. I think it is shaping up that absolutely one of them will. And then it'll really go to whoever the head-to-head matchup is. Some people have a very hard time seeing both Kim Janey and Michelle coming out of the prelims because they imagine they'd be drawing from somewhat of similar bases, since there is a little bit of a split between the conservative candidates of Anissa, John, and the more quote-unquote progressive from Michelle, Janey, and Andrea. But as most people who are involved in politics know, people do not really vote along those sort of ideological lines. That's how we would imagine they vote, but very few people do. It has to do with feeling, it has to do with emotion, it has to do with who you had a great experience with. And my only prediction in a Kim Janey versus Michelle Wu matchup is, because Kim is viewed to be to the right of Michelle, and because Kim would be able to galvanize, I think, more of the black vote within Boston that Michelle historically does worse than compared to some of the other candidates. And then also the fact that, again, she will have a little bit more on the side of capital, a little bit more on the side of the white working class. Though Kim Janey has also slighted the police unions in a way that I could actually see Michelle hedging her bet on that if they ended up in the top 2. So it would be fascinating. It would be absolutely fascinating to see how Michelle in particular would act if she was in a heads-up match against Kim Janey. But at this point, that's all speculative. This is all fantasy football. Let's get to something a little bit more concrete now, which is this article from WBUR. The Seaport costs billions to build. What will it take to save it? By Jesse Bermedios. And there is some audio to this that I'm going to play. But let's just actually go right into the audio. Let's hear what Marty Walsh has to say, and we'll see how much I go back to these clips.
Businesses in the world, like Amazon, Vertex, and General Electric. In 2017, former Boston Mayor Marty Walsh spoke about the neighborhood with pride and promise.
The Seaport tells a story of our city. The Seaport right now is hitting its stride. It represents the future, our future economy here in Boston. It's powering our cultural innovation. It's become Boston's calling card.
But this shiny...
Don't you miss that voice? My God, a horrible public speaker. But as this article goes into, by the year 2030, sea levels around Boston are projected to be 9 inches above what they were in 2013. And over the last few decades, billions of dollars have been poured by city, state, and federal funding has been poured into the Seaport. And it is now just glass towers of probably the wealthiest area, I believe, within the city. However, none of that construction actually took into account global sea level rise, which, for a project that was created, or at least began in the later 1990s, as reading here, by the 1990s, the space had become a desert of parking lots and warehouses. And then Mayor Tom Menino said, these 1,000 acres are among the most prized real estate on the East Coast in 1997, and we intend to put them to good use. And after $20 billion, there are luxury condos, beer gardens, restaurants, museum is there. And reading here, there are luxury apartment complexes filled with residents. Filled is a little skeptical. We actually don't know how many are these units occupied, how many are they just wealth assets for hedge funds. Filled with residents with a median household income of $153,545. The actual area median income of Boston is roughly $37,000, which means that the average Seaport resident makes approximately 4 times as much as the median Boston resident on a whole, which is absolutely absurd. And as I said, since 2000, 63 different projects have been built, none of them within a coordination of each other. They are always just, oh, you want this building? Okay. What do you got? You want that? Yeah, okay. Without any grand plan in place. Just whatever the Boston Planning and Development Agency wanted and felt like doing in the moment. And as I said, during this time, beginning from the late 1990s, none of these buildings took into account climate change, which everyone, as somebody who lived during that time, knew was a thing. People might remember somebody named Al Gore called An Inconvenient Truth. People knew it was a thing. And now here for me is one of the more shocking things. So the parameters of the waterfront development in the Seaport were originally set by the South Boston Waterfront Municipal Harbor Plan, published in 2000, and said he doesn't remember sea level rise being much of a concern in early Seaport planning discussions. That's the first one. Again, people knew this was a thing. But continuing, McGinnis said that it wasn't until 2016, which people knew about global sea level rise. If you didn't know in 2000, you absolutely knew in 2016, when Climate Ready Boston published an extensive report showing that the maximum possible sea level rise was 10.5 feet by the end of the century. That his agency really understood the extent of the problem. Does anyone legitimately believe that? Does anyone legitimately believe that it wasn't until they read a report in 2016 that our planning agency found out about global sea level rise, found out about climate change? Lies. But now listen to this part. By that point, 40 development projects in the Seaport had already been approved. Why do I want to call that out? Scrolling back up. There have been a total of 63 projects. By 2016, when these people just found out climate change existed, there was 40, which means that even if we accept the premise that these people were so thick that they didn't know that climate change was a thing until 2016, they still continue to allow the construction of projects. They added another 50% in terms of development that was done after they became aware of global sea level rise, which again, absolute lies. They knew this was going to be a thing. They closed their eyes to it. They took the money when they could. So now, as all lawmakers are putting their hands up saying, what do we do? Seaport was a mistake. We, the public, are now going to be put in a situation where we have to spend billions of dollars to protect the development, the assets, the private equity of these large developers, these large corporations, which went in there and did this. And rather than telling these companies, such as Amazon, hey, you're going to have to foot this bill. This is protecting your building. Who do you think's going to actually end up paying for it? Let's see if we can get some more stats here. In 2017, the BPDA began requiring all new developments to complete a climate resiliency checklist. And I love this, and this is a very common tactic for development, is they'll say, we're going to take this really serious. If you want to build, you're going to have to give us a report and about what you're going to do. And then the company just hires a private firm. They write up a report. They hand it to the BPDA. They say, oh, okay, cool. And they check it off, and they say, go build the development. It's nothing more than adding a step. I would love to know the number of developments in the Seaport that have been rejected since 2016 because their climate resiliency checklist was not up to code. My guess is that's going to be close to zero. Ultimately, what we should have done, because the whole thing is basically built on marshland, is to even further enrich some sort of a green waterfront protective zone, which basically every climate scientists, anyone who's been looking at this, is saying what every city is going to have to do just to stall. Build parks all along the waterfront that can absorb the water. Instead, we get a bunch of concrete. So let's listen to some more of the
atomic engine built on mudflats and salt marshes.
Mudflats and salt marshes.
Because climate change is here, and the sea is rising.
This is one of the most vulnerable. It's one of the lowest waterfront areas in the city of Boston.
Boston Green Ribbon Commission member Bud Riss knows the Seaport well. He ran the nearby New England Aquarium for almost a decade, and he helped write the area's official Climate Ready Boston plan in 2018.
Oh, and look at this. By 2070, almost the entire Seaport could flood on a monthly basis, or possibly more often. And that's another thing, is that every 2 years, we read a new article that says scientists are alarmed at how wild their projections were. Things are going to be much worse. I remember being at one development meeting where the person was talking about, by 2050, this level of flooding. 2070 could have this level of flooding. And then the guy just raised his hand and said, oh, and by the way, this doesn't take into account, like, if it rained that day, if there was a particularly strong high tide that day, if it was a bit windy. The conditions are all, like, the most basic. So, God forbid, there's a high tide during a rainstorm. That's never happened before. And we are so unprepared and acting with so little urgency because the people in power, either they know they can run out the clock. What, the Speaker of the House right now, 70, 80 years old, was just in the hospital down in Florida for a vacation rather than trying to figure this stuff out. So we're going to continue to hit them, and they're still approving projects for the Seaport, which is, again, the most mind-numbing part of this, was that even if you accept that no one at the Boston Planning Development Agency knew about climate change until 2016, come on, you still then allowed an additional 50% of the projects being built since that time. You still looked the other way and just hoped it all worked out. Oh, hey, this is on my bike trail for the people watching on the live stream. This is my little thingy. It goes to say that right now, Boston committed 10% of its annual capital budget, which is maybe one of the best of other cities, but also we are going to be the most impacted. It's like Miami and then probably us. And if I'm telling you right now, 10% is not cutting it. So let's transition, take a sip of my water. Answer the question of the chat. Yes, so you all look up at my chin. This is all being recorded on Twitch and YouTube and Facebook. Ultimately, it's sad to say, Carol, there was actually a Boston Globe article about that basically we have capital has stalled us long enough through climate denial, through trying to atomize us, the destruction of government, the destruction of any sort of community or cooperative nature. You're seeing this right now in our stances towards China, that now it's really just going to be about managing what has already been in occurring, ongoing climate change. You can call it climate apocalypse, but something, Matt Crispin's really good with this. The apocalypse is not distributed equally. There are already people in Boston to which the climate apocalypse has occurred. There are already people in Boston to which the economic collapse has occurred. And all of us right now are basically in Fortnite as that storm cloud takes over more and more territory and more people just fall out of use. Because unless you are able to sell your labor to the production of capital, or you have enough capital on your own to be a consumer, you are irrelevant to the equation, and you will be one of the forgotten people. Didn't want to end on that sad note, but that's basically where we're at right now. I'm not giving up, and I don't think the people on the stream is, but the lack of urgency is what I'm really trying to hit. The fact that we are still allowing the Boston Planning Development Agency to continue to approve concrete steel luxury towers in this area that every single person is in full agreement with needs to be fortified for climate resiliency, not just for the area, but for the entire city. It's mind-boggling. And we played the first half of the housing forum, and Michelle Wu was the only person who says we need to get rid of the Boston Planning Development Agency. Like, these people are literally killing us. Let's transition with that. Didn't think that would be as sad as it was, but that's okay. You never know what you're gonna get. The second half of the video components for tonight, and I just think this stuff's really important, and I gotta be honest, it's very dry, even for me. But the reason I did this project, apart from perhaps my own ego and perhaps to quell some boredom, is to watch the city council meetings, see how these people are spending our money, the decisions they're making, because it's simply just not covered. We don't have a local press really anymore. And so this is some committees that were established. Julian Mejia begins with some great stats. I want to hear Ricardo. He always hits his points pretty good. And then we're going to listen in on parts of the Committee on Ways and Means. And yes, California is going through, of course, another drought. Oh, hold on. Sorry. I forgot I speed through some of this stuff, to be honest. All right. Matt O'Malley just called upon Julie Mejia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm incredibly proud to stand here today to continue the work of our predecessors to create roots for Black men and boys in the city to succeed despite adversity. In 2014, Councilor Jackson filed an ordinance to create a commission on Black men and boys. When speaking as to why he was filing this ordinance, he made it plain and simple. He said, "I'm doing it because it's time." That time was 7 years ago, and we never got that commission. Since that commission was rejected, Black men and boys have continued to face disproportionate impacts of system that was never designed for them to succeed in the first place. A study published in the New York Times found that Black boys raised in America, even in the wealthiest families and living in some of the most well-to-do neighborhoods, still earn less in adulthood than white boys with similar backgrounds. In 2019, 28% of Black men ages 25 to 29 had a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 40% of white men and nearly half of white women. In Boston, Black men and boys make up a disproportionately number of homicide victims, and a study published in the Washington Post found that Boston had the highest gap in unsolved murders between white and Black victims. There is a clear need to...
I want to hit on that point because it's incredibly important. In Boston, if you commit murder, you are more likely to get away with it than you are likely to get arrested, because we have a less than 50% clearance rate. Our Boston police, who average median salary, just call it median salary, is $120,000 a year, who right now are spending all of their time chasing teenagers on dirt bikes who are driving around the city, cannot solve murders. And one of the biggest indicators about whether or not a murder will be solved is what is the race of the victim. If that victim is white, it has an insanely higher chance of being solved than if that victim is Black. Mostly because if it's a Black victim, to put it frankly, the police don't consider it worth their time. They see it as part of the natural element of being Black and living in a predominantly Black neighborhood. That's just something that naturally happens. Whereas if you have a white victim, well, that's not supposed to happen. And so the police will then spend their time, their resources to investigate that. I'm going to have Michelle repeat. I'm going to have Julia repeat that stat for us again.
Black men and boys make up a disproportionately number of homicide victims, and a study published in the Washington Post found that Boston had the highest gap in unsolved murders between white and Black victims. There is a clear need to pick up the work where Councillor Jackson left off. Our Commission on Black Men and Boys maintains the structure as proposed in 2014. The one significant change that our commission has is the ability to hold community forums and dialogues with Black men and boys on a variety of subjects, from sexual health to violence prevention to education and more. Since 2014, several cities, states, and federal offices have established commissions on Black men and boys. Even former President Trump signed a bill into law that created this kind of commission within the United States Commission on Civil Rights Office. The time has come for Boston to finish the work we started 7 years ago. We're choosing to file this in advance of Father's Day this Sunday. I look forward to passing this soon, and I would like to thank the amazing Black men in our lives who helped make this happen, including Ron Bell, Thaddeus Miles, Conan Harris, and of course, Tito Jackson for their steadfast leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Any further discussion on 0773? Would any councillors wish to add their name as a co-sponsor? Madam Clerk, please add Councillor Arroyo, Councillor Baker, Councillor Bach, Councillor Braden, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Saibi George, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Flynn, please add the chair, Councillor Wu, and docket 0773 shall be referred to the Committee on Government Operations. Madam Clerk, would you now...
It's just funny to me that Baker and Flaherty, they're like, yeah, put my name to it. So that way, if anyone accused me of being racist, I can say that I put my name to co-author the committee. It's funny.
Please read docket 0774.
Thank you. Docket 0774, Councilors Mejia and Arroyo offer the following ordinance, creating a commission on Latino boys and men.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The chair now recognizes the at-large council from Dorchester, Councilor Julia Mejia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Councilor Arroyo for co-sponsoring this important initiative. As some of you know, we have been on the council. As some of you who have been on the council for some time may remember, Councilor Jackson initially proposed a Black and Men Boys Commission. Over the course of the working sessions and hearings, it was decided to change the commission to include Latino men and boys as well. When filing these ordinances, we had a choice to make. Do we continue to merge these two distinctive groups together, or do we give them space to advocate and represent their own communities? Ultimately, we chose to create two commissions so that each group may advocate for themselves. What a lot of people in the city of Boston need to know is that there is a lot of tension between the Black and Latino communities in our city. This is something that I have experienced personally and have spoken about on the council as an Afro-Latina. During last year's budget vote, shortly after I spoke about why we voted no and the need to stand up for Black and brown people in the city, I received a call from a Dominican man who criticized me for claiming my Black roots. There is trauma here, and we need to be able to heal in our own space before we're able to heal together. And we also need to acknowledge that Black people and Latino people are not a monolith. Latino men and boys experience disproportionately impact are not the experience of their Black counterparts. For example, at every age, Latinos are less likely than white and Black boys to have health insurance coverage. And Latino men have some of the lowest levels of degree attainment, with only 20% receiving their associate's degree. We need both of these commissions operating in our city in order to fully address the needs of those in our community who experience the disproportionate impact of a system that was never designed for them to succeed in the first place. I look forward to this conversation, and I'm incredibly grateful to Councilor Arroyo for co-sponsoring this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Mejia. The chair now recognizes the district council from Hyde Park. Councilor Arroyo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll keep my comments brief. Thank you to the leadership of Councilor Mejia to create or to move towards creation of a Latino young men and boys commission. I am a Latino man, and depending on who you ask, I am a young one. But what I would say specifically to this is Latinos make up 19%, give or take 20% of the city of Boston's population, which makes them 1 in 5 Bostonians. And specifically, what that signifies to me, they've also been responsible for, I think, 89 or 90-something% of the population growth that Boston has experienced since the 80s. And so what that signifies to me is Boston doesn't just have young Latino men and women, for that matter, and boys as it's present. It's going to continue to have them as a constant part of their future. And so if we're going to try to break through disproportionate impacts of violence, disproportionate impacts of policing, disproportionate impacts of opportunity gaps, it's vital that we give them a shared space to do that. And the reason I say that is often Latinos are lumped in one way or the other. We see this nationally at a bigger scale where, you know, they're interchangeable, whether you're Mexican or Colombian. And the truth is, that's not true. Caribbean Latinos, Mexican Latinos, Central American, South American, we all have different cultures, different experiences with race and colorism. And so giving a specific place for them to bring these issues to the bear, to bring issues that they're experiencing in the city of Boston. They make up, Latinos, the majority of the BPS population, and so of a specific ethnic background. And so this is something where I think this is incredible leadership to ensure that we have a position in the place to ensure that we're raising the eliminating barriers and raising the proficiency and the ability for young Latino men and boys to succeed in this city and to truly call Boston home and an equitable home at that. So thank you to Councilor Mejia. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor
And
Roy.
now they all
Any
sign their
further
names
discussion
to
on
it.
docket 0774? Seeing none, would any councilors wish to add their name? Madam Clerk, please add Councilor Baker, Councilor Bach, Councilor Braden, Councilor Campbell, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Saiby George, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Wu. Please add the chair's name. And docket 0774 will be referred to the Committee on Government
All right, let's just listen to what the next one is, but we're probably going to skip
I would now like to
it.
ask Councilor Anissa Saiby George to take over the podium while I speak on the next dockets. Councilor Saiby George.
Oh, that's an interesting. Oh, he hit her.
Madam Clerk, please read docket number 0775.
Thank you. Docket 0775, Councilor O'Malley offered the following ordinance, amending City of Boston Code, ordinances Chapter 7, Section 7-2.1 and 7-2.2.
All right, what does this
Building
do?
Energy Reporting and Disclosure, known as BIRDO.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Let's
The chair
listen.
now recognizes President O'Malley. President O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Most of us can remember that time in math class where everything changed. We could no longer simply
God.
answer a question, but we had to show our work. For students who struggled with math, it was difficult, but it was important because it demonstrated not only that we knew the answer, but we knew how we needed to get there. When it comes to climate, we know what the answer is. We need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions, and we've made some pretty bold pronouncements through my time on this body. In 2014, we said we were going to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2020. We did not make that goal. 50% by
All right, so
2020, and
thank you, because I was about to hit that, and Madam O'Malley just came out and said it. They set a goal, but then they do not set any sort of accountability measures, any sort of punishments in place, anything to actually ensure it. So they simply just set a goal. And look, the first goal that they tried to set to combat climate change, that as we just talked about in the first second segment, about the Seaport, we are one of the most impacted cities of climate change because of our proximity to the water and because of our elevation to sea level. And the first goal that we tried to do, we blew past and failed.
bold pronouncements through my time on this body. In 2014, we said we were going to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by
2014 by 25%
2020.
by 2020. So it should have been last year.
Make that goal.
And you didn't do it.
50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. Through great collaborative effort and a really aspirational approach to the work, we've convened the Green Ribbon Commission, the Climate Ready Boston, Carbon Free Boston. This body, I'm proud to say, has done some really effective and important work in this space as well. Elected officials, advocates, experts, even some erstwhile critics, all seem to be generally in agreement on what we need to do to address the existential threat that is climate change. We're answering the question correctly, but now it's time for us to show our work. 8 years ago, I stood before this body right around this time as chair of the Government Operations Committee as well as chair of the Environment Committee, urging passage of the Boston Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance, or BERDO. It was the result of a lengthy process with this body and former Mayor Thomas M. Menino. The purpose of BERDO was simple. We were going to measure and hopefully manage utility usage in buildings that were larger than 35,000 square feet. Despite some vociferous opposition, it passed, and remains one of the pieces of legislation that I am most proud of. During that time, a funny thing happened. Participation exceeded even our highest expectations. The notion that building owners would actually want to make the efforts to make their buildings more energy efficient has proven to be true. And it's just not because of altruism. Energy efficient buildings realize significant utility and management cost savings. Since then, working in concert with so many of you, really with all of you, I'm proud of what has been known as my record on environmental justice, on environmental initiatives. We've led the fight on plastic bag reduction, gas leaks, community choice energy, wetlands ordinance, zero waste, curbside composting, textile recycling, net zero carbon standards for our buildings. But I'm thinking about, as my months on this body come to a close, what really is the most important legacy, the most impactful thing we can do.
But materially has resulted in nothing, which I think is the most important part. Probably the best thing Matt O'Malley did is I believe he's the reason why some public parks in Boston have free hand sanitizer. I like that one. That one was good.
And it's this, Beardo 2.0. I want to begin by thanking so many people. Jessica Morris from my team,
All right, come on.
my great quarterback.
Just tell me what it'll do.
Department, who's worked tirelessly on this, and most importantly, the advocates, 5 of whom are sitting behind me, who represent the countless others around the city who've been working on this. Thank you, Ricky Harvey, Andy Krasner, Andy Wells-Bean, Dwayne Tyndall, Sophia Owen, and so many others. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, you know what Beardo stands for, and I'm keeping the acronym, but I'm changing the definition. This is Boston's Emission Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. Here's how this ordinance will work. We're going to focus on all of Boston's commercial, residential, and institutional buildings that are 20,000 square feet or larger. Starting in 2025 and following every 5 years after, we're setting aggressive but achievable metrics for buildings to reach a substantial cut in their greenhouse gas emissions. There will be different classifications and requirements for each building type. For example, we're not going to hold a hospital to the same standard as a self-storage facility, but we will get to zero for all of them. We're going to work with building owners to help them meet their goals. We'll also allow for an alternative compliance that will help fund an account charged with environmental justice and renewable energy infrastructure. This update includes a new review board from the mayor, with approval from council, and most importantly, members of the community will help drive this bus, this electric bus, and lead us. We're offering both carrots and sticks, and we're going to finally create the blueprint, the greenprint, for Boston to become an international leader in greenhouse gas reduction.
Let's see what the carrot and sticks
Keep in
are.
mind, when we passed Beardo 1.0, very few cities around the country had something similar, and many followed our lead. I had calls from our colleagues in municipal government around the country saying, how did you do this? How did you deal with opposition from some folks, developers? And it was about a collaborative effort. This will put us as an international leader. When passed, this ordinance will only impact 3,500 buildings. That accounts for 4% of our building stock.
All right. I mean, that's an important highlight. This monumental thing, and I'm being overly critical and negative, to be honest, but what they're passing only applies to 4% of the housing and building stock that we have in Boston. Come on.
4%. And in those 4%, those 4% of buildings account for nearly 60% of all building emissions in the city of Boston.
Okay, well, at least that is
This policy would
something
result
of
in an estimated total savings
influential
of nearly
number.
37 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere over the next 30 years. When it comes to the existential threat of climate change, once again, we know what to do. We need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions. This ordinance is how we get there. We've talked the right talk, and I don't mean that as a criticism because we've talked about some really important things and put some really aspirational plans together. This is going to get this done. I have 6 months left as your colleague, as a member of this body. And perhaps this won't be the only ordinance that I introduce. In fact, there's one coming right.
I'm also very curious what he's doing after this. He most notably decided not to run for re-election once Kendra Hicks, who's running that district, made her intentions known that she was going to run.
After this, but this is something that I really want to be known as our legacy. I told you all before, and I think, so many colleagues know this, that perhaps the greatest perspective I received came on September 9th of 2020 when I became a parent. And this ordinance is not only important to me as a leader in the city, as a colleague of all of you, but I'm doing this for Margot, and I'm doing this for Benjamin and Maxine, and Stephen, and Caroline, and Cass, and Blaze, and Aiden, and Alexander, and Patrick, and Michael, and Elizabeth, and Jack, and Douglas, and Charlie, and Caden.
Okay, well, those can't be all of his kids. I'm assuming these are the kids of everyone in the city council.
And Annalise. We're going to get this done, folks. Thank you very much.
Oh my God, they clap.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is there anyone looking to speak on this matter? Councilor O'Malley?
Oh, it's Paramount.
Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you, Madam.
I got my one shot up here and I followed it up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously thank you for waiving our President's rule of no applause because it was well deserved. I want to commend our President and his leadership on this issue. I can attest to, as former Chair of Governor Office, he's been deliberate, he's been strategic, and he's been steadfast, battling not one but two administrations to make sure that this happens, and also giving thanks to others out front and for their continuous and their passionate advocacy
I'm sorry, everyone.
and also educating this body on the benefits of Berto. And as I mentioned, as the
There we go.
Chair of Government Operations and participating and getting to know not only Mothers Out Front but other advocacy groups in our efforts as a city council through Councilor O'Malley's leadership to move our city forward. So I'm excited and ask that my name be added. I'm excited for.
That's what you stood up to say, Flaherty? How is that helping me?
I'm excited for our city.
No one-
and as reference,
no one
I'm excited
cares that you're
for the
excited.
generation.
What is
So we're
this?
gonna put, obviously Boston on the map on this front, and so great work to my friend and colleague, and look forward to.
I can't even find a single article written about what they did. I don't understand
Thank
why
you, Councilor
people
Flaherty.
are
Please
saying
add Councilor Flaherty's name. Councilor
it's going to be
Brock?
that impactful. Let's see if I
Thank
can
you, Madam
find.
Chair, and thank you to our president and the filer of this. It's, I think it's a humbling aspect of what we all do that you just, you make in your moments the contributions you can to moving us in the right direction. And it's so powerful when you have a long enough career on a body like this to stand on your own shoulders like this and be the one who, got something done in the moment that was.
Are they just patting each other on the back?
Coming back to say, hey, we can do one better. So I just really want to commend the maker and also all the advocates who are here. ACE, Boston Clean Energy Coalition. I hear all the time from the Green Committee at the Neighborhood Association of Back Bay. We've just got a lot of folks who are sort of tirelessly in the weeds on this, and it's great to see it bear fruit in proposed legislation. I'm excited to be supporting that through the process, and I know in my own district have recently seen, actually, especially through this winter, some buildings where I had tenants just having crazy costs being passed on to them because of the lack of efficiency of their buildings. So I think recognizing that, that this
I'm
is
looking at the
something we have to do
current
for the planet, for our
building
community,
energy
and
reporting and
also,
disclosure
also that kind of
ordinance.
economic
I'm not
justice
seeing any
aspect.
carrots or
So
sticks.
just again, commend the maker and please, Madam Chair, add money.
Councilor Brock, thank you. Your
Okay,
name shall
are
be
they all
added.
just going to stand up
Councilor
and pat
Evans.
each other on the back for this? I don't need to
Thank you
listen
very
to
much.
this.
Message is received loud and clear. He's leaving in 6 months. This is going to be his signature legislation, and we will get it done as a body.
Signature legislation, and I can't find a single article on it.
Chair, but I was so inspired by what you were saying.
Okay. Yeah, we don't need the high fives from everyone. Which again, I don't know. I find it odd, the level of patting each other on the back for something that it doesn't seem like. I mean, saying it didn't get enough attention doesn't mean it's not important, because I might be the only person that actually goes back and listens to all these hearings. But I'm very curious, more details on it. Matt O'Malley himself only tweeted a YouTube clip of him talking. And so if anyone wants to send me what this plan is and why it deserved a standing ovation from members of the audience, and I know I'm being negative right now, I kind of apologize. That's just in my nature. Love to hear it. And all right, the last thing we're going to go into, we only got a couple minutes left. We're going to start to listen to Kenzie Bach explain what the city plans to do with the $500 million that we're getting. And I might have to go through this whole hearing at some point by myself. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. But I think it's going to be very important to look to see how the city spends this money, because we're under a shot clock. You have to spend it under a certain amount of time. And my big concern is that they're going to do the easy thing, which is to just pitch it to businesses. And while I am not against giving funding to small businesses, I think that if we're going to use public dollars to prop up privately owned businesses, the moment that they become profitable again, we need to have a stake and a say in those companies, whether that is ensuring certain salary requirements, certain residency requirements of their workers, or most importantly, if we give you all this money and you're the CEO of this company, and all of a sudden now you're raking in millions upon $1 million a year, guess what? We, the public, are now investors in this company, and we deserve some dividends. We deserve some returns on investment. And so I'm very concerned that they're going to take this big wad of cash that we're about to get, give it to businesses, and then a bunch of CEOs are just going to pocket it. That's what always happens. So let's listen.
I've probably heard by now about the American Rescue Plan, which was passed at the federal level in mid-March. And one of the things that included, in a very much to our appreciation, because it wasn't true of some of the earlier bills that we saw under the Trump administration, it included some general funding to support cities and towns. And that's really important because our local economies have been hard hit by the pandemic. And there's lots of just general revenue that's been lost. And while it was really important to have the CARES funding that we had through the pandemic for kind of immediate pandemic-related issues, I think that we all know that a lot of pandemic-related issues have been big picture economic issues, and also that the pandemic has exposed a lot of structural societal issues that we have. And so having our hands tied with how we can use the federal funding has been challenging in prior rounds of federal funding. And what was passed by the Biden administration is something with a lot more scope as we really think about building the city of Boston back better. And it includes, between the allocation directly to the city of Boston and the pass-through allocation for Suffolk County, about $500 million of kind of general funding.
$500 million.
That doesn't come for another year. But you're talking about the first half right now. But that's money to be spent over kind of a 3 to 4 year period. And so both the council and the mayor, are kind of looking at this funding and trying to balance a bunch of different things. So one of the things that we're dealing with is kind of immediate need, right? The fact that we are still in the COVID crisis, we are still doing testing, we are still doing vaccines, we've still got folks who are sick, and that's a really important ongoing set of work. We've also got this immediate need for economic recovery. And a desire to kind of stimulate that, and to stimulate it in ways that specifically really reach our residents, right? Make sure our residents are getting jobs and opportunity and economic help and rental stabilization and all these things. Then there's the fact that this money is available to us for 4 years because of the backwards looking nature of the city of Boston's main financial base, which is property tax. We have reason to think that some substantial economic impacts of the pandemic have not hit us fully yet and will hit future budgets of the city of Boston.
I just want to hit that real quickly. So, and a lot of cities are in this boat. It is intentional, but we can't really undo it overnight, in that a lot of municipal budgets are funded through local property tax. And that is why agencies like the BPDA are so reckless and haphazard with what they approve, because the only thing they really care about is whether or not this will, in the short term, and that's another very important fact to hit, bring in tax revenue, will it increase property value? Because the higher the property value is, the more taxes you get on it. And what Kenzie is stating, and a lot of people are very worried about this, myself included, is that we are approaching what looks to be like another massive foreclosure crisis. I think I saw 8 million homes across the country are basically on life support, and once the COVID restrictions on evictions are fully lifted in September, are going to be foreclosed on. 8 million. We don't know how many they're going to be here in Massachusetts, but there's, I mean, some stats we were seeing over the last 6 months were, half of all renters, a quarter of all renters, quarter of all homeowners are in some level of distress. And absolutely, agencies like Blackstone are going to foreclose, buy up the properties, and then people that were once homeowners are now going to, again, as I said in the first or second segment, just become pushed out of what is useful to capital. They will become part of the unforgotten people. And the second is not just residential, not just houses and renters and condos, but commercial real estate. What happens with all of this office space that we've been constructing that companies now realize you don't need? How much of that office space is over leveraged? There was a massive report about how once the foreclosure crisis happened in 2008, a lot of banks started using a similar scheme, but for commercial real estate, making it seem like the companies that were there were bringing in 5-10 times what they're actually bringing in, and it's all just floating off of debt. It's all just floating off of credit. And is this going to be the spark that lights that flame? And now all of a sudden, we just got a bunch of empty buildings on Newbury Street and Boylston Street. So we'll see.
So we would be remiss not to hold some of this money so that we can handle those well and not have to cut basic city services on people in 18 months, right? So that is another piece. And then there are these big structural challenges that we face and kind of thinking about this is a, never before, we hope not never again, but you certainly can't plan on it kind of federal disbursement. And so what are the kind of big structural things in our city that we could use some of this money to take a bit of a moonshot on? So I just want to articulate for the public that it's a lot of money, but we're dealing with kind of all of those different challenges. And the city council hears quite consistently from residents who are aware of this money and want to make sure it's being spent well in all those ways. And that's why our president, pro tempore, Matt O'Malley, launched this new committee, COVID Recovery Committee, to really have oversight of that funding, steward that funding. And as I mentioned, it's being ably chaired by my colleague, Councilor Michael Flaherty at large. And so while we're starting the scrutiny of that money in Ways and Means, because we're in an ongoing budget process, it's really going to transfer over. The initial proposal from the administration back in April, remember, this was mere weeks after the federal law had passed, was, well, why doesn't the council authorize that money? And then we're going to set up a coordinating committee of city departments and really look at how to spend this equitably well. And I think the intention there was great and in line with what all of us want to see happen. But from the council's perspective, authorizing that much money without yet having a plan for it is a challenge from an oversight perspective, because we take seriously our role vis-a-vis kind of scrutinizing your tax dollars and as the appropriating authority. So I'm appreciative of the fact that, after conversation, what the administration did instead was convene a number of committees, and I'll let Chief Starrett talk about this in more detail, but a number of departments internally to kind of have some of those conversations ahead of time about what are the real 3 to 6 month pay is a $50 million appropriation request that's really carving out those kind of 3 to 6 month things. And too much haste because we got to get it right. So it's a measure twice, cut once situation. But there are some really pressing things right now. And we want to make sure that the council and the administration are able to work together to get those done. So what's before us today is a $50 million appropriation request that's really carving out those kind of 3 to 6 month things. And we're going to have the chairs of the various sort of departments that would be executing on some of those things or passing through the funding to others like small businesses speak to us today about the necessity and kind of what they are proposing.
Okay, so just to clarify, we're anticipating roughly $500 million from the federal government. It's going to be spread across maybe a year or two. We need to spend that money within maybe a 3 to 5 year time period. Today, during this hearing, they're discussing 10% of that, so roughly $50 million. And they have different agencies that are going to speak on what they want to use the money for. And I'm going to keep echoing back, because I think it's going to be the most important thing, is how much of the public funds are going to go to privately owned businesses, and what will happen to those businesses once they stabilize, once they start making a profit again. Does the public get a stake now in that company because we bailed them out? I have a suspicion it's not going to come with a lot of strings attached.
Just so that councilors and others understand, there is also a need for American Rescue Plan funding to support the city's budget for FY22, because there has in fact been significant revenue loss from the pandemic. That authorization will be a separate authorization. That's not what we're talking about today. So we do expect a docket from the administration with a revised budget of a revenue source coming from the ARP funds. But that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is this kind of first tranche of like 3 to 6 month more immediate stuff.
I'm also very curious about the extent that Boston's revenue diminished, because obviously not just property tax but sales tax, and I'm sure sales were down. However, there's also tax on digital purchases. So I want to see the numbers, not just take it on face value that we had a massive tax hit, because everything that I was reading over the past year is that people's projections of how much COVID would impact the tax base was woefully, I don't know, wrong. And we actually did much better than even the most optimistic forecasters were predicting. But I need to see the numbers.
Yes. So that's just a little bit of context from me about where we are, and just to recognize the fact that that the administration has adjusted the approach here in conversation with the council. That's something that I, as always, administrator, appreciate. And now I want to pass it to my colleague, Councilor Michael Flaherty, for some words as well, given his role in kind of sharing and continuing the scrutiny.
All right, we don't need to listen to Michael Flaherty for tonight. I think that's going to do it. Well, I'm going to mentally keep track of where we are on this. I'll scan ahead, see what some of the sexy parts are, and maybe we'll take a look at this next week. Because I'm anticipating that the mayoral forums and the at-large forums and all that stuff to start drying up a little bit. But we'll see. So I'm going to say goodbye